أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد، فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. The book which we are going to study in our weekly hadith lesson is the book entitled in Arabic Mishkatul Masabih, written by a very famous muhaddith and scholar in the name of Imam Khatib Tabrizi rahimullah. Now this book, Mishkatul Masabih, is an expanded version of Imam Baghawi rahimullah's Masabihus Sunnah. And the original text, i.e. Imam Baghawi's Masabihus Sunnah, had approximately 4,434 ahadith. Whereas the text or the book which we are going to study, i.e. Mishkatul Masabih, it has over 5,945 ahadith. So what we can see is that this book here of Imam Khatib Tabrizi rahimahullah, not only is it an expanded version in terms of the contents, but also in terms of the number of ahadith as well. And the main reason why there is more ahadith in this particular book more than the original text is because in the original text of Imam Baghawi rahimahullah, his Masabihus Sunnah was split up into two parts. Each chapter, say about Salah, about Hajj, there were two parts. In the first part, there were ahadith from Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, and in the second part, there were ahadith from the other books of ahadith besides Bukhari and Muslim, such as your Sunan Abu Dawud, Sunan Tirmidhi, Sunan Ibn Majah, Sunan Nasa'i, Imam Malik rahimullah's Muwatta, and so on and so forth. But what Imam Khatib Tabrizi rahimullah did in this expanded version was, besides a first part and a second part, he's also added a third part. And in that third part, he's brought a hadith from Bukhari, from Muslim, from Abu Dawud, from everywhere, which Imam Baghawi rahimullah did not bring in his original version. So that's why you have an expanded version and also expanded in terms of the number of ahadith, obviously totaling more than 1,000 than the original text of Imam Baghawi rahimullah, Masabihus Sunnah. Now the chapter which we are going to look at or discuss firstly from this particular book is the chapter entitled in Arabic Kitabun Nikah, which in English means the chapter regarding marriage and regarding nikah. Now this chapter regarding marriage and nikah is on page 267 of Mishkatul Masabih. Now you may be thinking to yourself that why has Mufti Sahib skipped 200 pages and he's starting Kitabun Nikah? Why isn't he looking at the chapters before that? Now the reason why is because the chapters before Kitabun Nikah, before marriage, talks about Tahara, purification, talks about Salah, talks about Zakat, talks about fasting, talks about Hajj. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that those topics are not important. They are very, very important. But the issue, especially in our community where we live in, is topics such as marriage and the topic afterwards regarding divorce. These kind of topics are not actually given that much airtime besides, say, Salah, besides fasting, besides Hajj, and so on and so forth. When you look at it, Imam or a Khatib in his Jummah sermon or speech, he will always talk here and there about the significance of Salah. Even in the month of Ramadan, he will talk about the significance of fasting, he will talk about Zakat. Now we're going through the days of Hajj, the Imam here and there, they will talk about the significance of Hajj and the sacrifice of Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam. But very rarely would we see, say, for example, an imam or a scholar, say, in a Jummah khutbah, in a Jummah sermon or speech, talking very clearly about marital issues, talking very clearly about divorce issues? It's like one of those taboo subjects which people really don't want to talk about. People just want to brush it under the carpet. When it comes to things about salah and everything, people love to talk about it. And I said, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that they are not important. They are important. So people, they don't want to really talk about marriage. People don't want to really talk about divorce issues. So people don't want to talk about marriage issues, they want to talk about divorce issues, but they want to talk about more about the salah, about fasting, about zakat, and so on and so forth. Now, some may argue and some may say that talking about marital issues or about divorce issues, doesn't that go against haya? Doesn't that go against modesty? And bearing in mind that it is mentioned in a very famous hadith of Sahih Muslim, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, "Al-haya'u shu'batun min al-iman," that haya and modesty is a branch or is a part of iman. Now, the reply to that I will give is that haya, which is mentioned in the hadith, is that haya or that modesty, which is a quality within a Muslim or a believer, which stops him or which prevents him from doing a sin. That is the haya which is referring to in the hadith. So just say, for example, like, you want to, say, commit zina or adultery. But that haya is preventing you from committing adultery or zina, because you then think to yourself that, okay, if I was to commit adultery, and if I was to, say, for example, cheat on my partner, then just say somebody was to find out. So that haya then stops you from committing that. Or just say, for example, you want to go to a disco or you want to go to a club or something like that, but then you fear that, just say if somebody was to see me, just say if one of my colleagues was to see me, just say if my relative or cousin was to see me, if my elder brother was to see me, if my father was to see me, then what would happen? So that stops you from committing that particular crime. And that's why it's mentioned in another hadith that when haya goes, فَصْنَعْ مَا شِئْتَ, you are then capable of doing whatever you want. And that's why we then see, unfortunately, Muslim brothers and sisters, that when they've lost that total haya and the total modesty, they start doing sins, unlawful things, bad things, which even I am actually to say to you, ashamed to say that's how bad and that's how low they get. So that is haya in its own way. But remember, haya and modesty should not stop you from learning about your religion. That's the unfortunate circumstances and situation we're living in, that people, when it comes to learning about the religion, or they're too shy, they're too ashamed to learn about it. Haya, what is mentioned in the hadith, is haya to stop you from sin. However, haya and modesty should not stop you from learning about your deen and from learning about your religion. And we look at many ahadith later on, inshallah, where the female companion, Sayyidah Salama radiallahu anha, comes to my mind. She would openly ask Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam questions about women's period blood, about menstruation, bleeding, these kind of things. The female companions, they would openly and clearly ask. So remember, when it comes to learning about your religion, haya and modesty and being shy and embarrassed, that should not prevent you from learning about your religion. And another point why I wanted to actually touch on this particular topic is, as I've already alluded to, that it is a topic which is hardly discussed by anyone. And what then normally happens is that whenever there is a marital issue between a couple, because they are unwilling to talk about it with their local imam, with their local scholar, then what happens is that they then go onto the internet, they then go onto internet sites and so on, where the information is very, very unreliable. So they start learning other things about marriage, which is actually contradicts the teaching of Islam. So therefore, it's very important that we learn about this issue of marriage, about nikah, and also the section afterwards with regards to divorce, so that we can truly understand the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam regarding what he will do and what he did when it came to these issues. Now, before we look at the ahadith individually. I'm firstly going to briefly give an overview with regards to certain issues about marriage. Now, firstly, it should be highlighted that marriage is a sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There is a very famous hadith of Sunan al-Tirmidhi where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, "An-nikahu min sunnati." That nikah and marriage is my sunnah and is from my way. And remember, those of us who follow the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we are actually doing an ibadat. Remember, following a sunnah and a way or a practice of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that in itself is worship, that in itself is a ibadat. And I'm just going to mention a couple of ahadith. One hadith is with regards to the importance of following the sunnah, and another hadith I'm going to mention with regards to not following the sunnah and the severity of following ways or practices other than the ways and practices of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, the first hadith, which is of Sahih al-Bukhari, narrated by Sayyiduna Abu Hurairah radhiyallahu anhu, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, "Kullu ummati yadkhuluna al-jannah illa man abah," which means that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that every single person or individual from my ummah will enter Jannah and paradise. Illa man abah, except that person who refuses or who rejects. The companions then asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Waman abah?" What do you mean by rejecting? What do you mean that who will reject you? Upon which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then says, "Man ata'ani dakhala al-jannah." That whoever obeys me or whoever follows my way and my sunnah, then dakhala al-jannah, he will enter Jannah and paradise. وَمَنْ أَصَانِي فَقَدْ أَبَى. And whoever disobeys me, whoever does not want to follow my ways and my practice, then that person has refused me, has rejected me, hence he will not enter Jannah or paradise, but instead he will enter the fire of hell. So that is the first hadith talking about the importance of following the sunnah. And another hadith, but this one talks about the severity of not following the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I'm not going to go into detail regarding the hadith, but I'm just going to mention the first part of the hadith and the middle part, where these two parts are linked with the topic in hand. That Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, "Abghadu an-nasi ila Allahi thalathatu." That there are three people who are disliked by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So three people disliked by Allah, detested by Allah. Now you need to put that into consideration here, because as mentioned in other ahadith, the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in particular human beings, they are considered to be the most beloved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But here Allah is saying that, or Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying that out of the creation of Allah, out of human beings, there are three who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not like and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala detests. Now, there are the three, as I said, but one of them is وَمُبْتَغٍ فِي الْإِسْلَامِ سُنَّةَ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ, which means that person who seeks in Islam the ways of the people of ignorance, which in short means that a person who wants to copy or follow the ways other than the ways of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not like that person. So what we can gather is that our success in this dunya and in this world lies in following the Quran, but also following the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this term ittibai sunnah, following the sunnah, is very broadly used. Ittibai sunnah, I'll give you an example of ittibai sunnah, following the sunnah. Following the sunnah, take an example of Sayyiduna Abdullah bin Umar radhiyallahu anhu. He was known as that companion who would, word for word, action for action, would follow and copy what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did. And a good example is there's a hadith which can be found in Sunan al-Tirmidhi, Sunan Abu Dawud, where it's narrated, where he mentions the way Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would pray his tahajjud salah. So it's mentioned that he would pray his tahajjud salah. then the hadith goes on to say that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when the Fajr Azan would go, he would pray 2 rakats, Fajr Sunnah, then he would lie down for a bit. And then Sayyidina Bilal radhiyallahu anhu would then wake Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam up, and then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would lead the Fajr Jamaat and the Fajr Salah. Now, all the jurists have kind of interpreted this particular hadith, and they've said that here Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam lying down is not because of a sunnah, but it was done out of chance. It's like, say, for example, I feel a bit tired and I just have a nap here for 5-10 minutes. Don't want to say I'm acting upon a sunnah. Like you just, what will people say is, oh, Mufti Sahib tired and having a small nap. So exactly as well that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because he would spend the whole night in tahajjud, in salah, in prayer. So after Fajr Sunnah, before the congregation, before the Jamaat, what he did was at the back of the masjid, he would just lie down for a few minutes, and then Sayyidina Bilal radhiyallahu anhu would come and wake him up. But Sayyidina Abdullah bin Umar radhiyallahu anhu, he saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam lying down. He didn't then interpret, he didn't say that, oh, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam lied down by chance and so on and so forth. But what he did was that because he saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam lying down, that's it. From thereafter, every day after the 2 rakats Fajr Sunnah, Sayyidina Abdullah bin Umar radhiyallahu anhu would lie down. Why? Because he saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam doing it. So that is like the true meaning of ittibai sunnah. Word for word, action for action, doing what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did. So this was a great example of Sayyidina Abdullah bin Umar radhiyallahu anhu. So what I'm trying to say is that nikah is actually the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Abstaining from nikah is not the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And inshallah, I'm going to mention some ahadith with regards to the severity of those who don't do marriage, who don't do nikah, and what can happen. Inshallah, I'll mention it later. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Holy Quran has also touched on the topic of nikah and marriage. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the word Hunna libasul lakum wa antum libasul lahun, which means that they, hunna, i.e. the women, the wives, they are libas or concealment for you, wa antum libasul lahun, and you are concealment and libas for them. Now, what is this particular ayah or verse is trying to tell us is that, let's look at it rationally. Why do we wear clothes? We wear clothes so that we can protect ourselves from the heat and the cold. We can cover our private parts and so on and so forth. And when we look at it, when a person gets married, it then saves that individual from sins. The same way when a person wears clothes, it protects him from the heat and the cold. Somebody who is married, couples who are married, then they are saved from sins, they are saved from mischief, they are saved from fitna. Because what happens is, and as I said, we're going to look at this hadith later, that those who are not married, then it is more easy for them to get themselves involved in sins in terms of, it could be like looking at an unlawful woman, contacting an unlawful woman, having interaction with an unlawful woman, boyfriend, girlfriend, these kind of situations can easily arise. So therefore, Rasulullah said, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has described the act of marriage as libas, i.e. something which protects an individual from sin and from bad and unlawful and immoral things. And even when we look at Sayyiduna Adam alayhi salam, when he was created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted Adam Jannah and paradise, so Adam alayhi salam had everything he wanted in Jannah. As mentioned in the Quran, that whatever you desire in Jannah, you will get. If you want a particular dish or a meal, you will get that in Jannah and paradise. But even then, Sayyiduna Adam alayhi salam, he was alone. He felt alone. So what he did was that he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for a companion, and thereafterwards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from Sayyiduna Adam alayhi salam's rib created Sayyida Hawwa radhiyallahu anha, and Sayyida Hawwa was Adam alayhi salam's wife. So that's what I'm trying to say, that even though somebody may say, oh well, I've got so much money, I've got a big massive mansion, I've got all the cars and so on, I don't actually need a wife. I could live my life, I could enjoy my life by myself, then that is not true. You still need someone there to enjoy it with you. Even like a wife or then children, you just need somebody there just to enjoy that. You can't really enjoy something by yourself. Okay, if you are enjoying something by yourself, then most likely you're doing something sinful or something wrong. So obviously you're not enjoying that. But you actually need like a spouse, you then need children. And when you look at it, even those people, who don't have children, they will tell you themselves that even though they're married, there's still this kind of emptiness in their life. They need children for that enjoyment. So exactly here as well, that if someone is single, he can't say that he is happy. He actually needs a companion, he needs a wife so that he can live his life in a happy and in a good way. And because nikah and marriage is a sunnah, and as I said, marriage is an ibadat and a worship, so therefore married couple, when they are married, they are actually doing ibadat and they are actually doing worship. 24/7, they are actually in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's ibadat. As long as they are married and they don't do anything wrongful and they don't obviously divorce their wife, they are actually in ibadat and in worship. So that's how greater esteem Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala holds nikah and holds marriage. I'm just going to mention a couple of ahadith with regards to the virtues of marriage. The first hadith talks about the virtues and the second talks about those who don't marry. The first hadith, which can be found in Sunan al-Bayhaqi, narrated by Imam Bayhaqi, where he narrates from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that when a man marries, he has fulfilled half of his religion. So let him fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala regarding the remaining half. So this hadith is telling us that by getting married, when you get married, you have actually completed nisful iman, half of your faith, and you now then for the remaining half have to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in terms of worship, in terms of ibadat and so on. And the next hadith, which Imam Abu Ya'la has mentioned in his Musnad and Imam Tabrani rahimullah in his Mu'jam, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that the worst amongst you are the bachelors. Bachelors are those people who are not married. Then the worst amongst you are those who are not married. Now let's look at this particular hadith in a bit more detail. Why has Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam used those stern and harsh words? Now when we look at it, the reality is that those who are not married, then we see them, they are more prone to do sins, they are more prone to get involved into unlawful and haram things. And just take an example of the situation and the time which we are living in. People, when they reach their 20s, 25s, and they're not married, then obviously they need to fulfill their desires. Then what happens? They go on the internet, and even something like you try your best not to go to unlawful sites, but sometimes even when you go into your Hotmail account, on the side there's always an advert of, meeting girls or dating girls and so on and so forth. There's always these kind of adverts there. So even you want to go onto the internet for lawful things, for like checking your Hotmail account and so on, even on the site there's basically unlawful advertisement regarding dating and so on. And what could a person do is that he easily could just click on that. He may even just click on it, just say, out of curiosity, but then what happens, he clicks on it, and then he meets all these girls, he then starts interacting. Even when you look at Facebook, very easy to connect with girls. These things are very, very easy. Even when you go onto the internet, with one click of a button, you could have access to thousands and thousands of unlawful pornography sites. So these things are very, very open and very, very clear. So what then happens is that those people who are not married, they easily go to these sites and start, viewing things which they should not be viewing, and they fulfill their desires and their pleasure in that particular way. But that particular way is haram and is unlawful. Whereas Islam has given a lawful way, a mubah way to fulfill your desires, and that is through wife and through your wife. So that's why in this particular hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying that the worst amongst you are the bachelors. Those who don't get married, they are more prone to involve themselves in sins and in fitna, so therefore Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said these stern and harsh words regarding them. Now we're going to elaborate on the topic of marriage. Now the first ruling which I'm going to look at now is what is the ruling or the legal ruling of getting married. Now unlike other things in Islam where there is a set ruling, like say for example in Salah to recite Surah Fatiha is wajib, to recite a surah afterwards is wajib, standing is farz, ruku is farz, sitting down is farz, these kind of things are set rulings. However, when it comes to nikah and marriage, there isn't a set ruling on marriage that whether it's farz, whether it's sunnah, whether it's wajib. But it depends on the situation of the individual, and according to his situation, the relevant ruling will be given whether it is obligatory, whether it is farz, whether it is haram, and so on and so forth. Now the scholars have written that there are, technically speaking, 5 situations, and accordingly the 5 rulings are given. So the scholars have said, number 1, there are certain situations when marriage and nikah becomes farz, obligatory farz. The same way your 5 daily prayers are farz, there are certain situations when marriage and nikah is farz. And when is that? That is when an individual has an overwhelming level of desire that he or she is certain of committing adultery. So if someone's desires and shahwa is such that he is so desperate, using the slang word, that he fears, well not fears, he's actually certain that he will commit adultery, then in that situation, marriage and nikah for this individual becomes farz. Because obviously, if he's certain he's going to commit adultery, then that is haram and that is unlawful. So therefore, marriage and nikah, and then fulfilling his desires in that particular way, then that becomes farz and obligatory on that particular person. So that is the first situation. The second situation is that certain situations, nikah becomes obligatory and wajib. And that is when an individual has such desires that he fears committing adultery. He fears that he will commit adultery. So the first situation when it is first to get married, that is when you are sure and certain that you're going to commit adultery. The second situation is that where he fears that he may commit adultery, and listen to this carefully, or he cannot prevent himself from masturbation. So just say someone's involved in the sin of masturbation, then in that situation getting married becomes wajib and obligatory. Now let me just touch on this topic of masturbation again. This is a very common problem for the youth. Okay, all the youth, whether Muslims, non-Muslims, doesn't matter, a very common problem where people are involving themselves in this particular sin. I'm just going to mention a couple of hadiths with regards to this particular sin. The great Mufassir of the Holy Quran, Imam Ibn Kathir rahmatullahi alayhi, has mentioned that there are 7 people who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not look at, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not purify. So when we say Allah will not look at that person, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not show any of His mercy and rahmah on this individual, nor will Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will purify. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send this person or these people to hell. Okay, so 7 people, Allah will send them to hell. Who are they? One of the 7 are those who masturbate. Those who do istimna bil yad, those who masturbate, that person will go to hell. Obviously, unless he does tawbah and repents for his sins, then obviously that is different. But if he doesn't, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not look at him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not show His mercy on the day of judgment, and that person will be sent to the fire of hell. In another hadith, Ibn Jarir al-Tabri rahimahullah narrates that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will punish those people who play with their private parts, i.e. again referring to istimna bil yad and masturbation. So remember, masturbation is something which is unlawful and haram. So if someone is doing such an act and he cannot stop himself, like he's trying his best, and we're going to look at the ahadith later, where he's doing things such as fasting and so on and so forth, trying to keep his desires and shahwa intact, but he can't help it, but he then entails himself in that particular sin, then what the scholars have said is that nikah becomes wajib and obligatory on this person. The third situation, this is when nikah is considered to be sunnat muakkada, I emphasize sunnah, is for an individual who is of a moderate state, i.e. his desires are not severe to the extent that he fears that he will commit adultery or he is certain that he will commit adultery. Then in that situation, nikah is considered to be sunnat muakkada, I emphasize sunnah. Then there is a fourth situation when actually nikah becomes makruh tahrimi. And when is that? That is for that individual who fears that he may be oppressive to his wife, or he may not fulfill his wife's desires. So it becomes makruh tahrimi. And the fifth situation, very similar, is when it becomes haram for him to get married, and that is when he is certain of him not fulfilling his wife's desires or rights, or that he fears that he may be unjust and unfair to his wife. And again, this is a very common issue, again, that sometimes there are men who are impotent and they can't actually fulfill their wife's desires, and they actually know this, and sometimes what happens, the parents know about it as well. But then what they do is that the parents still do the nikah with a particular woman. Obviously, the woman, she needs to fulfill her desires as well. Now, if she has a husband who can't fulfill her desires, then what normally happens is that marriage ends up in talaq and ends up in divorce. So the Sharia has said, yes, that if a person is sure and he's certain that he won't be able to fulfill his wife's desires, or he won't be able to fulfill the rights of his wife in terms of maintenance and in terms of a shelter, then it becomes unlawful and haram for this person to get married. Now, one of the beauty of Islam is that it always looks at the means or tries to stop the means before the actual thing happens. And what I'm trying to say is that talaq or divorce is considered to be something detestable and something disliked in Islam. So what Islam tells us is that before you get married, the girl or the spouse who you are choosing, make sure that this particular woman has certain conditions and certain criteria before you get married to her. Because otherwise what would happen is that if you were to just get married without actually checking on this particular girl's piety and taqwa, then what will eventually happen is that marriage will end up in tears in terms of talaq and in terms of divorce. Very famous hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, "Tunkahul mar'atu li arba'in," that a woman is married for 4 reasons. Limaliha, she is married for her wealth. Wali hasabiha, she is married for her rank. Wali jamaliha, she is married for her beauty. Wali diniha, and she is married for her piety. Fafzar bizati din taribat yadak, choose the possessor of piety and achieve success. Now what this hadith is telling us is that when we decide to get married and we want to choose a particular girl, then we should look for a girl who is pious, who is righteous, and we should not look for a girl to get married just because of her beauty or just because of her wealth. Because in another hadith of Sunan ibn Majah, the nearest meaning to this particular hadith, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that do not marry women for their beauty, because it is possible that it may cause her destruction. What does that mean? If you just married a woman just because she is very, very beautiful and very, very pretty, then what happens is that she could easily turn around and say to you, well, I'm not going to listen to you. When you tell her to do something, she said, no, I'm not going to do that. And she could even turn around and say to you, well, divorce me, I could go and get married to someone else because I'm beautiful. There's so many suitors outside who will be willing to get married to me. So what could happen is that if you're going to marry a woman just because of her beauty, it may make her rebellious. Exactly same if you were to marry someone just because of her wealth. Again, she could turn around and say, well, I've got so much money. Why are you telling me to do this? You do that. She will boss you instead of you telling her and you bossing her. So again, these things will lead to a difficult marriage and will lead to the wife becoming rebellious and going against the husband. So therefore, Rasulullah ﷺ has said that when you choose a particular woman, and also vice versa, that when a woman decides to get married and she wants to choose a husband, then choose someone who is pious, choose someone who is righteous. Now don't get me wrong, Islam is not trying to say that not to get married to beautiful or pretty women, or Islam is not trying to say that to get married to a poor woman. Islam is not trying to say that. Islam is saying that qualities or attributes such as beauty, such as wealth, such as status should be taken into consideration, but it should not be the main reason why you get married to her. The main reason why you get married to her should be for her piety and taqwa. Obviously, a person naturally, he wants to get married to a girl who he feels attracted to. So obviously Islam says, okay, there's nothing wrong with that. But that should not be the main reason. The main reason should be that you choose this particular girl because she is pious and she is righteous. Obviously, beauty and something is something very important because it then helps a husband loving a particular woman and similarly vice versa. But that should not be the main reason. The main reason should be piety, should be taqwa, and should be righteousness. And always remember one thing, beauty is something which is temporary. It'll go after a few years. If you marry a particular woman, say in her 20s, when she reaches her 30s, that beauty will go away. When she reaches the 40s, 50s, it definitely go away. But one thing which will not go away is her akhlaq and is her manners. If you marry a particular woman because of her piety, because of her akhlaq, because of her characteristics, because of her manners, then these things will never go away. Even when she is 30, 40, 50, 60, these things will remain. So that is the main thing which the Sharia has said, that choose a particular woman for her piety and for her taqwa. The Sharia then elaborates on this particular point. Remember, these things have been mentioned by the Sharia, laid down by the Sharia, so that a nikah doesn't end up in tears in terms of talaq and divorce. Another thing which the Sharia has said is with regards to equality between the boy and the girl, which in Arabic is called kuf. That the girl and the boy, they have to be on the same wavelength. They have to be from, you could say, more or less the same culture. Their mentality must be the same for the nikah to be an everlasting nikah and marriage. Now what I mean by that is, just say for example, if you were to get a particular girl from, say, Bangladesh, or a boy from this country, or vice versa, sometimes what could happen is that their mentality is totally different. So if the boy or the girl, they find it difficult to understand each other's needs and desires. However, if the boy and girl have been brought up in the same society and in the same culture, then they find it easy to understand each other. They find it easy to understand where that person's point of view is coming from. So again, this is another teaching of Sharia. Some people think that I've got a daughter, let me just take a Bangladesh and get her married to any person. That's the teaching of Sharia. No, the teaching of Sharia is that there has to be kuf and there has to be equality between the boy and the girl. Now looking at it from a jurisprudence point of view, there are 5 things, just very briefly, there are 5 things in which there should be equality between the boy and the girl. Now another point to remember is that when we look at kuf, or when we look at equality, we look at it from the girl's point of view and not from the boy. What I mean by that is that we look at it whether this particular boy is compatible for this particular girl. We don't look at it the other way around, whether this particular boy is compatible for this particular girl. We look at it whether this particular boy is compatible for this particular girl. Now there are 5 things where there has to be some form of equality and kuf. The first point is equality in lineage. Now again, I don't want to go into too detail, but just a couple of rulings here. The first ruling is a Sayyid. Now who is a Sayyid? Sayyid is someone who is from the descendants of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's daughter, Sayyida Fatima radhiyallahu anha's side. You call her offspring a Sayyid. After Sayyida Fatima radhiyallahu anha passed away, Sayyidina Ali radhiyallahu anhu then married other women. Their offsprings or his offsprings from those women are not called Sayyid, but they are called Alawi. And they don't have the same ruling. So it has to be basically from the offspring of Sayyida Fatima radhiyallahu anha, they are called Sayyid. Now the ruling is that a Sayyid is compatible for other Sayyids. But a Sayyid woman is not compatible for a non-Sayyid man or a non-Sayyid boy. So just an example, there's a girl, she's a Sayyida, but she can't marry, again it's mentioned in the books of fiqh, that she can't marry a non-Sayyid boy. It's mentioned in the books of fiqh. However, many contemporary scholars have nowadays given fatwa that if the marriage did take place, then the nikah and the marriage will be done. But if you were to look at the classical books of fiqh, in particular the Hanafi books, then it tells us that Sayyid girl is not compatible for a non-Sayyid boy. But instead they have to be both the same. But besides Sayyid, any non-Arabs, which we call them Ajmis, so it could be Bengalis, Pakistanis and so on and so forth, they are compatible for each other. So just say, for example, if a Pakistani girl was to get married to a Bengali boy or vice versa, then that nikah will be valid and that nikah will be done. You may argue and say, well, they're not from the same culture. Yes, that is true, they're not from the same culture, and obviously we will say that it's best that they should be from the same culture so that the nikah is everlasting. However, if a Pakistani boy was to get married to a Bengali girl and so on, then that nikah is totally valid. The reason why I'm saying this is that once something happened where a person's daughter who was a Bengali, she got married to a Pakistani boy. So that person was of the view of that nikah isn't done at all, they're living a life of sin and zina. That is not exactly the case. The ruling in the fiqh is that a Pakistani boy, if he was to get married to a Bengali girl, then that nikah and marriage will be considered valid and done. So that is the first thing, i.e. equality in terms of lineage. The second point here is equality in terms of piety and taqwa. I.e. a sinful man cannot be considered equal or compatible for a righteous woman. So to say if a woman is really, really pious and then somebody is trying to get her married to a man who is a total, say, sinful person, gambling, drinking alcohol, then technically speaking, such a nikah should not be done. Why? Because they're not compatible for each other. The third point here is with regards to equality in wealth. Like again, it's mentioned that if a woman who is quite well off and quite rich, and then she wants to marry a man who is not able to afford her dowry or who is not able to afford her maintenance, then again that nikah, technically speaking, should not be done. But as I've already mentioned, that the fatwa is that the nikah will be done. And the fourth point is in terms of equality, in terms of occupation. That there are certain jobs which, if a man was doing, which is considered to be very, very wrong or very, very sinful, then that particular man or boy could not be considered to be kuf or compatible for a particular woman. Just say for example, if a man was, say, a drug dealer, or just say he was like a hitman or something like that, or something, or like just say if a man was like, something like wrong or something sinful he was doing, then that particular man could not be considered to be compatible or kuf for a particular woman. But as I said before, that the scholars have given the fatwa that if the nikah did take place, the marriage and the nikah will be done. And the fifth point here, which is also quite important, is that there should be some sort of equality in terms of age. It shouldn't be such that the man is, say, 50 and the girl is 20, or even vice versa. Because again, they're like two different age groups. Their thinking and mentality is going to be totally different. So again, the Sharia says that the ages should be quite similar. Obviously, the man should be a bit older, but obviously if the girl is a bit older, that doesn't matter. But as long as they're more or less from the same age band, then that is also appropriate and that is also preferable as well. One final ruling which I'm going to mention before we finish for this week, linked with this particular topic, is just say, for example, if there is a girl and she is a scholar, an alima, so can she get married to a non-alim, i.e. a normal person who is not a scholar? Now again, the ruling is that the nikah will be done. I.e. if a woman or a girl who is an alim and she gets married to a non-alim man or a non-alim boy, the nikah will be done. Now it is mentioned in some books of fiqh where it says that if a woman is a alima or knowledgeable, then her kuf is someone of the same level, i.e. the boy she has to marry has to also be a scholar as well. Scholars have kind of interpreted that particular text and they've said that there is a difference between the scholars of yesterday and the scholars of this day and age. The scholars of the past, they were very, very pious. They had so much taqwa and piety, whereas you could say the scholars of this day and age, they're not of that particular caliber. So therefore, if, say, for example, if a woman who is an alima, who is, say, for example, knowledgeable, then it doesn't necessarily mean that she has to marry alim or a scholar. If she was to get married to a non-alim or a non-scholar, then that particular nikah and marriage will be considered valid and done. We just leave it for this week. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to act on what has been said. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Does any brothers have any questions I'd like to ask for?